Hello everyone, we're going to be back in book number 1 of the Phoenix Journals, aka the Sipapu Oddessy, and this segment is called Opening the Gathering. As the first gray fingers of light sifted silently across Bob's palette, he thanked God for the new day. He got up from his bed and dressed with eagerness. Today was the day of the mighty council gathering, and he felt as if he might explode from anticipation. He would dress as quickly as possible and walk over to the ship and have breakfast with his friends. Fawn had said she would be unable to see him before the mid-morning, and he was too restless to wait alone. He heard no sounds from outside, and he wondered where everyone might be. The Indians did a sunrise ritual every morning, but no one was out this particular morning. Well, he assured himself, the medicine man would be doing his morning greeting to the day, so he slipped on his shoes and hurried outside. The stillness lay heavy on the canyon. There was no medicine man, and there were no Indians anywhere. Only the hawk was there, dancing its own morning ritual. His heart clutched tightly as he thought of Fawn and wondered where she might be. Bob was pondering the situation as he reached the spacecraft, changed his shoes, and boarded. Things were normal, as far as he could determine, and he was somewhat relieved. Yorgos was the first to greet him and smiled in response to his inquiries. He assured Bob that Fawn would be joining them for the journey to the gathering, but the other tribal members had departed earlier. Others began to filter into the room, and the subject was changed. As promised, about mid-morning, Fawn appeared. When Bob asked where she had been, he received no answer, and a wave of anxiety swept through him. He knew he was not ready to experience the Sipapu, and sadness crossed him as he feared the time was very near for decisions to be made. He tried to put it from his mind and turned his thoughts to the gathering. The present group was unusually quiet, and there was practically no conversation. Each was totally preoccupied with the anticipated council meeting. The silence continued during the swift journey to the meeting site. The craft sat down quietly behind a range of mountain foothills, shielded from the Tehachapi. The travelers transferred into vans for the trip into town, so as not to draw undue attention. They would simply appear to be more participants in the movie productions. There was a beehive of activity as they reached the filming location. Stands of bleachers had been erected to facilitate seating several hundred people and were almost filled. Camera crews were working diligently, setting up backup lighting and generators to power the portable cameras. Stage crews were finishing up the podium. About 200 to 300 feet to the east of the stage area was a replica of a spaceship identical to Yorgos's. This was to be a major prop for the movie. The movie had been set up as a science fiction fantasy to avoid any questions or public attention. Plans had been carefully laid to the most minute details. Arrangements had even been made with the Air Force at Edwards Air Base to anticipate radar blips from special effects. Bob smiled when he noticed several Air Force officers in the group of onlookers. The town was full of visitors and town residents, as it was in the middle of their annual mountain festival. It had been planned so that the local people could come to the meeting as extras and appear as audience members in the movie. There was great excitement in the town, and it was as if everyone was on holiday. The stars in the movie were the most prominent in the industry, and it was in fact a fantastic happening for the local residents. It had also pulled in many visitors, which helped in the success of the festival activities. The invited participants had mostly come by car from Los Angeles, Lancaster, Mojave, and Bakersfield, or had been brought in by private planes to the little airport. Tehachapi was too small to house very many overnight visitors. As the group reached the bleacher area, Bob and the Hensleys were stunned. They had been told what was taking place, and yet were totally unprepared for what they saw before them. The seats were filled with well-known public figures from every walk of life. Faces which appeared at every peace gathering were present. Diana audibly gasped, and Steve simply said, "Wow." Whoever set up this plan and script must surely have received the instructions from the masters themselves, thought Bob. Fawn was totally serene and calm, and Bob marveled as he watched her. She actually glowed, and he wondered if anyone in the stands could see the aura surrounding her. He was hopelessly in love with her. The sounds from the bleachers was a vibrant buzzing as the people were deep into conversations. They were thrilled at the opportunity to be together, and the consensus of the feelings was that the movie would be a great positive boost to the various peace groups. Some who simply volunteered their time and paid their own transportation had to be refused participation due to the overwhelming turnout. Places were made for all in the observer area, however. There was plenty of room for any who wished to sit on the ground or stand around the periphery of the scene location, and all vacant spots were rapidly occupied. This was surely a day which would never be forgotten. Steve noted that there was a heavy dark cloud bank rising above the hills to the northeast and moving directly toward the crowd. He said with great humor how wet it might become within a few hours, and hoped the show might be finished before the downpour began. The group found their appointed seats in the chairs which had been reserved near the stage in front of the bleachers. Yorgos, Richard, Hippias, John, and Athenia had been seated to the right of and immediately adjacent to the stage. Several of the Indians from the canyon village were already gathered in the seats close by Yorgos' group. Bob wondered how they had traveled and supposed a second ship had brought them. His mind was boggled by his recent experiences and the things he had learned. It was as if it could hold no more and had begun to simply absorb instead of react. Steve and Diana seemed to be accepting things far better than he, and Fawn was simply one with the energies that overwhelmed the setting. Bob looked onto the northern sky and motioned Steve. The ominous cloud was becoming steadily more threatening. Softly, through the buzzing of the crowd, came the strains of exquisite music. It seemed to have no place of origin. It simply wafted within the breeze. There was, however, an immediate reaction from the crowd. Not a human sound was audible other than the music. Silence was total. Then there was a gust of gentle wind through the set, and the music became stilled. The crowd remained silent. As if through some strange magic, figures began to move onto the stage as if out of nowhere. They were obviously participants in the council and were to be speakers, Bob presumed. As the speakers took their place and settled in their chairs, the vibration energy could be physically experienced as if it were electric currents. The set was intensely lighted, but Steve pointed out that the auxiliary lamps were not functioning. The lighting crews were frantic in their efforts to get them turned on. The power had been interrupted and the electric lines were dead. The camera crews were making futile efforts to start the standby generators, but failed. The cameras, however, continued to function perfectly, as if nothing were amiss. Some faces in the crowd began to show fear, and Bob wondered if there might be panic starting. The entire setting was one which would make Spielberg grin with success. And that was obviously what was saving the situation from chaos. The crowd was still under the impression they were acting in a motion picture. There began a few murmurs from the crowd, and, as if cued by the sound, John rose and strode to the podium. The light moved with him. The crowd was again hushed. The clouds moved ever closer. John spoke softly, although his voice carried clearly to the most distant listeners. The electronic speaker system was dead, but no one noticed. The cloud covered completely overlaid the area and continued its steady march to the south. It would soon blot out the sun. Already there was an ominous darkness, which caused a general feeling of strange tenseness. Suddenly, as if someone had thrown a switch, John and the platform were bathed in a magnificent rainbow of colored lights. The lights, with their myriad of colors, flashed and danced a moment before settling into a 30-foot circle of intense spectrum of colors. One couldn't see beyond the brightness to find the source of the light. It simply came from somewhere in the sky overhead. John radiated the gentleness and love as he softly spoke. He said that this gathering was of such importance that all must listen carefully to the things which would be offered. He said the occurrences of this day would affect the universe. He said that apart from this gathering there would be happenings of such magnitude within a period of these few days that all earth people would be forced to take note. He said that many things had been set in motion within the earth itself, of which the consequences were irreversible. He emphasized that those gathered together at this place were not here by accident or coincidence. It was intended so that they would be safe in the physical body for further activities. He said that no one was to be afraid. All was planned by the higher energies. At these words, a calmness seemed to pass through the crowd. He continued by saying that most of those gathered here were part of the ultimate source's 144,000 chosen teachers as spoken of through the millennia of time past. He said Earth had reached the final crisis and that the path taken from this point forward would decide the outcome of man's survival or self-destruction. He said no one could act for another. All actions, changes, desires, and choices must be made within the inner souls of each individual entity. He said these teachings had been handed down through the many ages of time and had recently been presented in modern language in the book New Teachings. In addition, the ancient teachings of ones in the oral tradition are to be presented for the first time in a new book called The Sacred Hill Within. Those would be available to all who would seek learning and knowledge. He then stood silently for a moment, his face raised into the rainbow of brightness. When he returned his attention to the gathered audience, it was as if he held the colors within his physical hands, gently and with intense love. He said each ray was precious, just as each individual entity is precious to God, and that each is created from that single ultimate source of light, the God light. Without that light, there would be no rainbow. There would be nothing. He described that ultimate light as being of such brilliance that no earthly entity could look into it. He said that from the ultimate God energy flowed two major rays, one ray being the silver-white ray of creation, and the other being the golden white ray of the Christ purity. As these two magnificent rays of light merge and refract through the wondrous crystals of the universe, the light is splintered into the marvelous colored light energies of the rainbow. But, he continued, no energy, no entity, or even spirit source is to receive the ultimate reverence. That ultimate reverence is due only unto the ultimate light source, God. That light is the all, and without that light, all else could not exist. He said all must cleanse their inner beings, love and care for each other, cleanse and heal our Mother Earth, and give unqualified love and reverence to that ultimate God light. He said if man would not change and continue to turn from the light toward darkness, the negative consequences would be absolute. Then, as if to make a point, he turned his face again into the light and raised his hands toward heaven. No thing can survive without the light, he repeated. as suddenly as the bolt of lightning, which streaked instantly from the heavens, and with a horrendous burst of thunder, the world was plunged into darkness, total absolute blackness. It seemed an eternity locked in the void of nothingness. Not even with the tiniest spark of light shone from anywhere. The void was infinite. God had made his point forevermore. Bob could hear the soft sobbing sounds around him, but mostly there was only silence, the silence of death itself. Then John held forth one tiny match, with its puny flame. The impact was total. And John spoke again, and reminded each that we must take our own small flame, add it to our brother's, and bring light and love again unto earth, or it would terminate in the darkness. The scene was once again slowly bathed in the rainbow-colored light, which then blended into two, and then into one brilliant source of pure white light. John then turned to the spotted eagle and asked him to come forward. He introduced Spotted Eagle and said he was of the Ancient Ones. He said they were of the beginning, and their truths had not changed throughout eternity. Some of the people had forgotten the truths, but they were nonetheless unchanged, and would now be remembered in order to lead us home. And that's going to be the end of this segment. Thank you.